So I'm going to talk to you today for just about 10 minutes about what I'm considering as this universal feeling of rejection, loneliness, and perhaps human connection. So much of my research to date has focused on minority health and health disparities found among minority groups. Mostly since beginning my faculty position about 5 years ago, I focus on LGBT populations, including issues of intersectionality, family, the military, and broadly, this guy. But most of my work tends to focus and center around young sexual minority folks that look a lot like this. Well, and honestly, this is actually just a Google image that represents my goal, which has been a lot of time trying to help them look like this. But unfortunately, all too often, youth who identify as sexual and gender minorities end up looking a lot more like this. LGBT youth are more likely to suffer from depression, report substance use and abuse, experience anxiety, and unfortunately, consider and attempt suicide. In fact, recent meta-analyses suggest that LGBT youth are 3 to 5 times more likely to make a suicide attempt that requires medical attention than their heterosexual peers. But the question we all ask ourselves is why? And this is regularly answered by a single word, that is stigma. Stigma has been examined through theoretical and empirical works for more than 50 years, but little work exists to intervene and address it in a systematic way. So I started to think, if I want to make broad change in the world, maybe this is where I should make my stand. So I wrote a grand challenge paper asking us all to consider that stigma is not just an outcome of the populations that we care about, but perhaps a fundamental cause of the health disparity itself. The idea here is that stigma is not just something that happens because one is part of a stigmatized group, the part that we see, but rather maybe it is the part that we don't see that makes the difference. And we all know how that story ends. I added that last night. The idea of exploring stigma made a lot of sense to me and really energized my thinking, honestly, about how to address not just the health outcomes of the populations that I cared about, but to be perfectly honest, those that I think all of you probably care about too. Yet while the idea seemed grand enough for a grand challenge, I recognize that historically, the only interventions that we seem to rely on focus on direct one-to-one experiences, where a member of a target group is introduced to a member of the agent group, and because of their experience together, stigma is reduced. This approach has been useful across a variety of settings and populations, but we have really struggled in our ability to bring this to scale. So I was overwhelmed and I didn't really know where to go. And I started to walk back my grand ideas of addressing stigma and return to the communities that I know, that I identify with, and that I felt I could get tenure with. And I would make an impact with my local and national agency partners in the LGBT community. And with these partners, I started to listen to the experiences that LGBT youth were having every single day of their lives, so I could perhaps make some small impact on this community that I cared so much about. And after talking with more than 600 youth, we began to hear their stories. For example, they would tell us, and then for some reason in my head, I thought people would totally know. As soon as they look at you, like, you're different from everyone else. And I was kind of really uncomfortable with that. I was uncomfortable with myself. And they said, the majority, well, a lot of people are becoming more accepting, but then there's the others. The others who think you're disgusting, who hurt you because you're gay, who shun you because you're gay. You know, that's why I'm afraid. I mean, I don't want to be isolated. It's just we don't really talk about it. It's quiet, I guess, since we, hold it all in, and that's how it's been. And I'm not 100% sure even now, even when I'm with them. I don't feel like I'm part of the group. I always feel like I'm looking into the group, but not within the group. And at times before I would just get sad. And now I've just accepted it. It was a pretty low point in my life because I just felt like I didn't have anyone to go to. Nobody checked up on me. Nobody asked how I was. Nobody seemed to be concerned with how I was feeling. Just nothing. And on November 10th, after the world changed so unexpectedly, I watched the numbers of callers to the Trevor Project, the largest national suicide crisis hotline in the United States for LGBT youth, increase nearly 400% in a single day, or 12 standard deviations above the mean. And I was angry, and I was heartbroken, and I cried a lot. Now, admittedly, since having kids, I also cry at basically every Disney movie and almost any inspirational Dove commercial that I see. But still, I was sad. And I went back and I began to wonder, why do these quotes have such a visceral reaction in me? What is this countertransference that I'm having? Why do I feel these youth so deeply in my core? Is it because I identify as a part of this community? Is this just the example of me search? But the more I thought, and the more I reflected, and the more I talked to my mentors and my friends and my colleagues about this, the more I realized I didn't connect with these youth just because of my own personal background. Quite honestly, I had a nearly perfect coming out experience. Rather, I could relate with the feelings of isolation. I could relate with the feelings that there were times in my life when I had no friends and no one cared. I could relate with the feeling of being left out and rejected. I could relate with feelings like the time when Jessica Delaney turned down my invitation to the prom because I wasn't cool enough. I think she dodged a bullet in the end. What I realized in these narratives was that I was not connecting with these young people because of our individual shared experience. I was connecting with them in a universally shared experience. And I'm guessing that some of you can probably relate with me too. So ultimately, perhaps the argument that I realized could be made in that part of our strategy in addressing stigma is not just how we help make the stigmatized person less stigmatized. Maybe instead, we also need to include helping everyone realize that at some point in their life, they have felt left out and lonely too. And while this does not mean to undermine the importance of structural issues that need to be corrected in addressing social stigma and oppression in this country, for me, this realization felt a little like this. So I went back to my young LGBT youth, and I thought, I wonder how I could use this to better help them. How might we find some protective factors in the world, or some companionship to reduce those feelings of isolation? And I went back to my work with Trevor, and I started looking for signs of where this type of approach might be working. And I saw this. I'm still here. I'm not sure what exactly would have happened if I hadn't called. They helped me by telling me that I have value and I am not worthless. It helped me to be able to know that other people are understanding of my issues and that I am not alone even when I feel like I am. I was able to calm down and think through my problems individually and feel safer in my own skin for a while. I stopped and looked at my choices, and I was able to cross suicide off my list of answers. And this is where I am today. What will I do next to address these universal feelings of loneliness and isolation? I'm not entirely sure, but I think the bigger question is, what can we all do next to address it? Thank you.